In Alder Ridge, Ohio, on a gray November morning, a headline appeared that no one wanted to believe. A 12-year-old boy sat in a juvenile courtroom, charged with 4 murders. Ryan Beckett wore an orange jumpsuit 3 sizes too large, the fabric bunching at his shoulders and pooling around his wrists. His small frame seemed to drown in the outfit, a visual reminder that he was still a child. But the charges spoke differently. 4 classmates dead, 4 families destroyed, a community fractured beyond repair. For Ryan, this was not about justice or truth. This was theater. He understood the cameras positioned in the back of the courtroom, the reporters scribbling notes, the eyes watching his every gesture. He tilted his head just so when the judge spoke, letting his lower lip tremble at precisely the right moments. The initial charge read almost gently: juvenile delinquency and negligent discharge of a firearm, words that felt too soft for what lay beneath. The defense had constructed a careful story about an unknown older teenager, a weapon found by accident, a child caught in circumstances beyond his control. For a time, the narrative held. But the prosecution had something else. One piece of evidence, sealed and waiting. A video, short, unedited, and completely unforgiving. By the time the judge spoke Ryan's name for the final time, the performance would be over, and the truth would stand alone in the cold fluorescent light of the courtroom. The arraignment began at 9 in the morning. Judge Margaret Caldwell entered through the side door, her black robe crisp and severe. She was 62 years old, a veteran of family court who had seen thousands of juveniles pass through her courtroom. None like this. She sat heavily in her chair and adjusted her glasses, looking down at the case file with an expression that revealed nothing. The gallery was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras positioned at every permissible angle. Family members of the victims occupied the front left section, their faces etched with grief so profound it seemed to weigh down the very air. Ryan's mother, Patricia Beckett, sat alone on the right side, her hands knotted together in her lap, her eyes red and swollen. She had not slept in 4 days. Ryan stood between his defense attorney, Marcus Holloway, and a juvenile court officer. Holloway was 45, a public defender with 17 years of experience, who had handled everything from truancy to aggravated assault. He had never defended a child accused of quadruple homicide. His navy suit was impeccable, his expression professionally neutral, but his jaw was tight. He placed one hand on Ryan's shoulder, a gesture meant to convey solidarity and protection. Ryan did not look at him. The boy's eyes were fixed on Judge Caldwell, wide and glistening, the picture of terrified innocence. The judge spoke first. Her voice was firm and clear, cutting through the thick silence. This court is now in session. We are here for the arraignment of Ryan James Beckett, age 12. Charged initially with juvenile delinquency, including acts of vandalism and negligent discharge of a firearm. The court notes that additional charges are under consideration pending the outcome of the ongoing investigation. Mr. Beckett, do you understand why you are here? Ryan nodded, then seemed to remember himself and spoke softly. Yes, Your Honor. His voice cracked on the second word, a small, boyish break that echoed through the microphone clipped to the defense table. Holloway leaned toward the microphone. Your Honor, my client is a 12-year-old child with no prior criminal record. He is frightened and confused by these proceedings. We ask the court for patience and consideration given his age and emotional state. Judge Caldwell's expression did not change. The court is well aware of the defendant's age, Mr. Holloway. Proceed with the plea. Holloway straightened. My client enters a plea of not guilty to all charges, Your Honor. The words hung in the air, Ryan's shoulders shook slightly, as though he were trying to hold back tears. He reached up with one small hand and wiped at his eyes. The gesture was visible to every camera in the room. Several reporters leaned forward, pens moving rapidly across notebooks. Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Diana Reyes stood on the opposite side of the courtroom. She was 38, a career prosecutor known for her meticulous preparation and unflinching courtroom presence. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had spent the last 72 hours reviewing every piece of evidence in this case, and she knew exactly what she was dealing with. She had seen the video. She had watched it 7 times, each viewing more chilling than the last. Reyes addressed the judge. Your Honor, the state acknowledges the defendant's age but respectfully submits that the severity of the crimes alleged warrants a full evidentiary hearing. 4 children are dead. 4 families have been destroyed. The evidence will show that this was not an accident, not negligence, and not the work of an unknown third party. The evidence will show premeditation, deliberation, and execution. We ask the court to allow the process to unfold so that the truth may be heard. Ryan's head snapped toward Reyes, his eyes narrowing for just a fraction of a second before his expression melted back into wounded confusion. It was fast, but Reyes caught it. So did one of the reporters in the back row, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had covered juvenile crime for 12 years. She made a note in the margin of her pad, circling it twice. Judge Caldwell reviewed the documents before her. The court will proceed with the evidentiary process. Discovery materials will be provided to both parties according to standard procedures. The prosecution has indicated the presence of significant evidence. The court will review the admissibility of all exhibits prior to any presentation to ensure proper handling given the defendant's status as a minor. Mr. Holloway, your client will remain in juvenile detention pending further hearings. Bail is denied given the nature of the allegations. Patricia Beckett let out a small, choked sound. Ryan turned to look at her, his face crumpling. Mom, he said softly, his voice breaking. Mom, I didn't do anything. I swear, please. The words were perfect, the delivery flawless. Patricia began to sob, covering her face with her hands. Holloway placed a hand on Ryan's arm. It's okay. We're going to fight this. Stay strong. Ryan nodded, his chin trembling. But as the court officer began to lead him away, he glanced toward the news cameras one more time. Just a flicker of a glance, followed by a subtle adjustment of his posture, straightening his spine, tilting his chin down to create a more sympathetic angle. Sarah Chen caught that too. She underlined her earlier note and added a question mark. As the courtroom began to empty, Reyes gathered her files. Her co-counsel, a young attorney named James Park, leaned close. He's good, Park murmured. I'll give him that. Reyes did not look up from her papers. He's a performer, but every performance ends. We just have to let the truth speak. The next hearing was scheduled for 1 week later. In that time, the defense worked to build their narrative, while the prosecution meticulously assembled the evidence that would dismantle it. The courtroom reconvened on a Thursday morning. The gallery was fuller than before, every seat claimed by 8 in the morning. The media presence had doubled. This was no longer just a local story. National outlets had picked it up. A 12-year-old accused of murdering 4 of his classmates in cold blood. The details were too shocking, too unthinkable to ignore. Holloway called his first witness, Sandra Blevin, the school counselor at Alder Ridge Middle School. She was 51, with kind eyes and a soft voice. She had worked at the school for 14 years and had known Ryan since he was in 5th grade. She took the stand and swore her oath, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Holloway approached with a gentle, almost paternal demeanor. "Miss Blevin, how long have you known Ryan Beckett?" "About 2 years," she replied. "He started seeing me in 5th grade after his parents' divorce. He was struggling with the separation and needed someone to talk to." "And what was your impression of Ryan during that time?" Sandra smiled sadly. "Ryan was a gentle boy, sensitive. He loved art class and science. He was always drawing in the margins of his notebooks, little sketches of animals and landscapes. He struggled socially, which is common for kids dealing with family disruption, but he was never aggressive, never violent." "Did Ryan ever express anger or violent thoughts during your sessions?" "Never. Not once. He was sad, yes. Confused about why his family was falling apart. But he never spoke about hurting anyone. He just wanted things to go back to normal." Holloway nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "In your professional opinion, Miss Blevin, is Ryan Beckett capable of the acts he's been accused of?" Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "No, absolutely not. The Ryan I know is a scared, hurting child, not a killer." Holloway returned to his seat. "Thank you, Miss Blevin. No further questions." Ryan sat at the defense table, his head bowed, his hands clasped in front of him. His shoulders shook slightly. His mother, seated directly behind him, reached forward and touched his shoulder through the gap in the railing. He leaned back into her touch, a picture of a child seeking comfort from his mother. Reyes stood for cross-examination. Her expression was neutral, professional. "Miss Blevin, you testified that you've known Ryan for approximately 2 years, correct?" "Yes." "And how many one-on-one counseling sessions have you had with him during that time?" Sandra hesitated. "I would estimate around 15 to 20 sessions total. He didn't come regularly after the first few months." "So, 15 to 20 sessions over 2 years. That averages to less than 1 session per month. Is that correct?" "I suppose so, yes." "And each session lasted approximately how long?" 30 to 45 minutes. Reyes walked slowly toward the witness stand. "So your total time spent with Ryan Beckett, one-on-one, over the course of 2 years, amounts to somewhere between 7 and 15 hours. Is that a fair assessment?" Sandra's expression tightened. "I also saw him in group settings, in the hallways, at school events. But your testimony about his character, his gentle nature, his lack of violent thoughts, that is based primarily on those 15 to 20 sessions, correct?" "Yes, but..." "Miss Blevin, did Ryan ever tell you about his relationship with the 4 victims?" Sandra paused. "He mentioned some difficulties with other students, teasing mostly." "Teasing? Did he tell you the names of the students who were teasing him?" "No. He was vague about it. He didn't want to get anyone in trouble." Reyes pulled a document from her folder. "I'd like to show you a series of text messages recovered from Ryan's phone. These messages are dated between 6 months ago and 1 week before the incident. In these messages, Ryan refers to 4 classmates by name. He describes them using profane language. He states, and I quote, 'I wish they would just disappear.' Does that align with the gentle, non-violent boy you described?" Holloway was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is not qualified to interpret text messages out of context. These are the words of a frustrated child venting about bullies." Judge Caldwell looked at Reyes. "Counselor, do you have a specific question for this witness?" Reyes nodded. "Miss Blevin, were you aware that Ryan had expressed these sentiments about his classmates?" "No. He never said anything like that to me." So there were aspects of Ryan's emotional life that he did not share with you. Is that correct? Sandra's voice was quieter now. Yes, that's correct. No further questions. Sandra stepped down, her earlier confidence shaken. As she passed the defense table, she glanced at Ryan. He looked up at her with those wide, sad eyes and mouthed the words, "Thank you." She nodded, her expression pained, and left the courtroom. The afternoon session brought Detective Luis Morales to the stand. He was 43, a veteran of the Alder Ridge Police Department with 20 years of experience. He had been the lead investigator on the case from the moment the first call came in. He took the stand in his dress uniform, his posture rigid, his expression grim. Reyes led him through the timeline. Detective Morales, can you describe the scene you encountered on October 15th at Alder Ridge Middle School? Morales took a slow breath. I arrived at approximately 3:45 in the afternoon. The school had been evacuated. Emergency medical personnel were on site. I was directed to the Eastern Athletic Field behind the gymnasium. 4 students were down. All were deceased by the time I arrived. The medical examiner would later confirm that all 4 had died from gunshot wounds. Can you describe the condition of the scene? The victims were positioned in a cluster, approximately 10 feet from the tree line that borders the field. Spent shell casings were located approximately 50 yards away, in a concealed position behind a maintenance shed. The trajectory and distance suggested a deliberate setup. This was not a random shooting. The shooter had positioned themselves in a location that provided cover and a clear line of sight. What did you find at the shooter's position? We found the weapon, a modified hunting rifle. We found additional ammunition. We found footprints matching a size 6 shoe consistent with a youth size. And we found a jacket that belonged to Ryan Beckett. His name was written on the tag inside the collar. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Ryan's head jerked up, his eyes wide. He leaned toward Holloway and whispered urgently. Holloway placed a calming hand on his arm, but his own expression was troubled. Reyes continued. Detective, did you question Ryan Beckett about the jacket? Yes. He claimed he had lost it several days earlier and had no idea how it ended up at the scene. He stated that an older teenager, someone he did not know, must have taken it. Did you find any evidence of this older teenager? No. Despite extensive interviews with students, staff, and community members, we found no evidence of any unidentified individual on school grounds that day. Security footage showed no one entering or leaving the area where the shooting occurred, except for students who were accounted for. Detective, you mentioned the weapon was modified. Can you explain? Morales nodded. The rifle had a defect in the barrel, likely from improper maintenance or a manufacturing flaw. It caused a distinctive rifling pattern on the bullets. This made the weapon traceable. Any bullet fired from that specific rifle would have a unique signature. And did the bullets recovered from the victims match this signature? Yes. All 4 bullets came from that rifle. Reyes paused, letting the information settle. Detective, where was this rifle originally kept? It belonged to the maintenance supervisor at the middle school, a man named Donald Harp. He kept it in a locked storage shed on school property. He used it occasionally to scare off wildlife that wandered onto the grounds. Mr. Harp reported the rifle missing approximately 1 week before the shooting. He had noticed the lock on the shed had been tampered with. Did Ryan Beckett have access to this shed? Yes. Ryan was part of the environmental club. The club used equipment stored in that same shed for their projects. Ryan had been seen in the area multiple times in the weeks leading up to the incident. Holloway stood for cross-examination, his expression sharp. Detective Morales, you testified that Ryan claimed an older teenager was responsible. Did you investigate that claim? We investigated every lead, Mr. Holloway. We found no evidence to support it. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, correct? Just because you didn't find this person doesn't mean they don't exist. In 20 years of police work, Mr. Holloway, I've learned that when a story doesn't match the physical evidence, it's usually because the story is false. That's your opinion, Detective, not a fact. It's an informed opinion based on the evidence. Holloway's voice sharpened. Detective, my client is a 12-year-old boy, a child. Are you telling this court that you believe a child is capable of planning and executing a quadruple homicide with this level of sophistication? Morales met his eyes without flinching. I'm telling this court that the evidence speaks for itself. And yes, Mr. Holloway, I've seen enough in my career to know that age doesn't preclude capability. What matters is intent, opportunity, and evidence. Ryan Beckett had all three. The courtroom was silent. Ryan's face had gone pale. His hands were clenched into small fists on the table in front of him. For just a moment, the mask slipped. His expression was not one of fear or confusion. It was cold, calculating anger. Sarah Chen, seated in the third row, caught it. She wrote 3 words in her notebook and underlined them twice. He knows he's caught. The hearing adjourned for the day. As Ryan was let out, he did not look at his mother. He did not look at the cameras. He stared straight ahead, his jaw set, his eyes empty. The following week brought the forensic evidence. A ballistics expert, Dr. Raymond Cho, testified about the weapon's unique characteristics and the matching of bullets to the rifle. He explained in careful, technical detail how the rifling pattern was as distinctive as a fingerprint, how there was no possibility of error. The bullets that killed 4 children came from the rifle found at the scene, the rifle that had been stored in the shed Ryan had access to, the rifle with Ryan's jacket lying beside it. A digital forensics expert, Maria Santos, testified about the text messages recovered from Ryan's phone. She displayed them on a screen for the court to see. The messages showed a pattern. Ryan had been tracking the movements of the 4 victims for weeks. He knew their schedules. He knew when they gathered at the Eastern Field after school for informal soccer games. He knew they would be there, unguarded and distracted, on October 15th. One message, sent to himself as a note 3 days before the shooting, read simply, Friday, 3:45. Make sure they're all there. Santos explained that the message had been deleted, but recovered through forensic analysis of the phone's memory. Ryan had tried to erase it. The technology had defeated him. Holloway fought each piece of evidence, challenging the chain of custody, questioning the reliability of digital recovery methods, suggesting the possibility of tampering or error. But the evidence held. Each expert witness was credible, prepared, and unshakable. Ryan's demeanor began to change. The wounded innocence was harder to maintain. He fidgeted more. He whispered more urgently to Holloway, his voice rising at times before his attorney shushed him. He glanced at the cameras less frequently, and when he did, his expression was not vulnerability, but irritation. The courtroom gallery noticed. The reporters noticed. Patricia Beckett noticed. She sat each day with her hands twisted together, her face growing more haggard, her hope visibly draining away. On the 8th day of the hearing, Reyes called a witness who changed everything. His name was Marcus Chen, 13 years old, a classmate of Ryan's, and one of the few students who had agreed to testify. He was terrified. His hands shook as he took the oath. His voice was barely above a whisper as he stated his name. Reyes approached him gently. Marcus, I know this is difficult. Take your time. Can you tell the court about your relationship with Ryan Beckett? Marcus swallowed hard. We were friends. Kind of. We sat together at lunch sometimes. Did Ryan ever talk to you about the 4 victims, Michael Torres, Aisha Patel, Darnell White, and Emma Klein? Yeah, he talked about them a lot. He said they were mean to him. They made fun of his drawings, called him names. Did Ryan say what he wanted to do about it? Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He said he wanted to make them stop. He said he wanted to teach them a lesson. Did he ever describe how he would teach them that lesson? Marcus nodded miserably. He said he had a plan. He didn't tell me what it was. But he said they would be sorry. He said it would be big, something everyone would remember. When did Ryan tell you this? About a week before it happened. I thought he was just talking, like venting. I didn't think he would actually do anything. Marcus, did you see Ryan on the day of the shooting? Yeah. I saw him before last period. He was walking toward the equipment shed. He looked, focused. He wasn't scared or anything. He looked calm. Did he say anything to you? He said, "Watch the news tonight, that's all." Then he walked away. The courtroom was utterly silent. Marcus was crying openly now, his small frame shaking. I should have told someone. I should have said something. I didn't know. I didn't think he was serious. Reyes's voice was soft. You're not responsible for what happened, Marcus. You're here now, telling the truth. That's what matters. Thank you. Marcus stepped down, his face buried in his hands. His parents met him at the gate and led him quickly from the courtroom. Ryan's expression had gone cold. The performance was fracturing. He stared at the table in front of him, his jaw clenched so tight that the muscles in his neck stood out. Holloway leaned close and whispered something. Ryan shook his head sharply, a quick, angry gesture. The next witness was Dr. Linda Zhao, a forensic pathologist. She testified about the gunshot residue found on Ryan's hands and clothing. The pattern was consistent with someone who had fired a rifle multiple times. The defense argued that Ryan could have picked up the residue by handling the weapon after the fact, as he claimed. Dr. Zhao calmly explained that the concentration and distribution pattern suggested active firing, not passive contact. The science, she stated, did not support Ryan's version of events. A firearms instructor testified about the precision required to hit 4 moving targets from 50 yards. It was not impossible, he stated, but it required practice, familiarity with the weapon, and a steady hand. The shots that killed the 4 children were placed with accuracy. This was not a panicked, random shooting. It was controlled, deliberate. By the end of the second week, the defense's narrative was in ruins. The older teenager theory had no evidence. The idea that Ryan had stumbled onto the scene and been framed was absurd in light of the forensic evidence. The text messages, the witness testimony, and the physical evidence all pointed to one conclusion. But the prosecution had one more piece. The piece that would end all doubt. The piece that Ryan did not know existed. On Monday morning of the 3rd week, Reyes stood and addressed Judge Caldwell. Your Honor, the state has one final piece of evidence to present. It is, in our assessment, the most critical exhibit in this case. We request permission to present Exhibit 47. Holloway was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, the defense has not been provided with adequate time to review this exhibit. We request a continuance to examine the evidence and prepare a response. Judge Caldwell looked at Reyes. Counselor, when was this evidence disclosed to the defense? "48 hours ago, Your Honor, in accordance with discovery rules. The defense has had access to the exhibit and all supporting documentation." Holloway's voice was tight. "Your Honor, this exhibit is a video recording. The analysis required to authenticate such evidence is complex and time-consuming. 48 hours is insufficient." Judge Caldwell studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Holloway, the court is aware of the significance of video evidence. I am also aware that the prosecution has provided expert witnesses to authenticate the exhibit. You will have the opportunity to cross-examine those witnesses. The court will allow the presentation of Exhibit 47. If you require additional time for rebuttal witnesses, that can be arranged. But the evidence will be presented today." Holloway sat down heavily. Ryan leaned toward him, whispering frantically. Holloway shook his head and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, but Ryan jerked away. For the first time, his composure fully cracked. His eyes were wide, his breathing rapid. Reyes called her witness. "The state calls Michael Dorsey, senior digital forensic analyst with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation." Michael Dorsey was 39, bald, with thick-framed glasses and an air of calm competence. He had been analyzing digital evidence for 15 years. He took the stand and swore his oath. Reyes began. "Mr. Dorsey, can you describe your role in this investigation?" "I was brought in to analyze electronic devices recovered during the investigation. Specifically, I was asked to examine a smartwatch that was found at the crime scene." "Whose smartwatch was it?" "It belonged to one of the victims, Michael Torres. The watch was damaged but still functional. It had been recording video at the time of the incident due to an automatic feature that activates when the device detects unusual movement or impact." "Can you explain that feature?" "The smartwatch has a safety feature designed to help in emergencies. If the device detects a fall or sudden impact, it automatically begins recording video and audio and attempts to send an alert to emergency contacts. In this case, the alert did not send due to poor cellular signal in that area, but the video was saved to the device's internal memory and backed up to the cloud service associated with the watch." "Were you able to recover this video?" "Yes. The video file was intact. It was approximately 23 seconds long." "And what does the video show?" Dorsey took a breath. "It shows Ryan Beckett at the location where the shooter was positioned. The video captures him setting up the rifle, checking the sight line toward the field, and speaking directly to the victims by name. The audio is clear. The video quality is sufficient to identify the defendant without any doubt." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a few shouts from the victims' families. Judge Caldwell banged her gavel. "Order. This court will have order." Ryan's face had gone white. His hands were shaking. He stared at Dorsey with an expression of pure panic. Holloway stood, his voice strained. "Your Honor, I must object. This evidence, if it exists, is highly prejudicial. The defense needs time to examine the authenticity of this recording to ensure it has not been tampered with or fabricated." Judge Caldwell's expression was stern. "Mr. Holloway, this is precisely why expert witnesses testify. Mr. Dorsey will explain the authentication process. You will have ample opportunity to challenge it. Sit down." Holloway sat. Reyes continued. "Mr. Dorsey, how did you authenticate this video?" "I performed a comprehensive forensic analysis. I examined the metadata associated with the file, including the date and timestamp, the geolocation data embedded by the device, and the file creation logs. I verified that the video was created on October 15th at 3:43 in the afternoon, precisely 2 minutes before the first emergency call was made. The geolocation data places the device on the eastern athletic field, which matches the location where Michael Torres's body was found. I also examined the video for signs of editing or manipulation. There were none. The file is original and unaltered. Can you explain how you determined there was no editing? Digital video files leave traces when they are edited. Changes to the file structure, inconsistencies in compression artifacts, discrepancies in metadata. These are all indicators of tampering. I found none of these indicators. Additionally, the video was automatically backed up to the cloud service within seconds of being recorded. The cloud copy matches the local copy exactly, which would be impossible if the local copy had been altered after the fact. Reyes walked to the evidence table and picked up a small electronic device in a clear evidence bag. Is this the smartwatch you analyzed? Yes. And is this the video file you recovered? She held up a tablet displaying a paused video frame. Yes. Reyes turned to Judge Caldwell. Your Honor, at this time the state would like to play Exhibit 47 for the court. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. The exhibit may be played. A large screen was wheeled to the center of the courtroom. The lights were dimmed slightly. The room fell into a silence so profound that the sound of breathing seemed loud. The video began. The image was shaky at first, the smartwatch's camera capturing movement as Michael Torres ran across the field, laughing, chasing a soccer ball. Then the camera angle shifted and the view stabilized as Michael stopped to catch his breath. In the background, barely visible through the trees, a figure could be seen moving near the maintenance shed. The audio picked up voices, Michael and his friends joking, teasing each other. The sounds of adolescence, of children who did not know that their lives were about to end. Then the camera captured something else. The figure near the shed became clearer. It was a boy, small in stature, wearing a dark jacket. He was crouched behind a stack of equipment, positioning something long and metallic. A rifle. The boy's face turned toward the field, and the camera, enhanced by the smartwatch's stabilization software, captured his features. It was Ryan Beckett. There was no doubt. His face was clear, his expression focused and cold. The audio captured his voice. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but the smartwatch's microphone was sensitive. Ryan's words were unmistakable. Michael, Aisha, Darnell, Emma, I told you I'd make you pay. He raised the rifle, his movements calm and practiced. He sighted down the barrel, adjusting his position slightly. He took a breath, let it out slowly, and said one more thing. This is for everyone who thought I was nothing. The video continued for 3 more seconds, capturing the moment when Ryan's finger moved to the trigger. Then the screen went black as the first shot was fired, and Michael Torres fell, the smartwatch tumbling from his wrist into the grass. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Then it shattered. A woman's scream cut through the air, raw and agonized. It was Michael Torres's mother. She collapsed in her seat, her husband catching her, both of them sobbing uncontrollably. Other family members broke down. The sounds of grief filled the room, overwhelming, devastating. Ryan sat frozen at the defense table. Every trace of the performance was gone. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and glassy. His hands trembled violently. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. The mask had not just slipped, it had disintegrated completely. Holloway sat beside him, his own face pale, staring at the now blank screen. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire case collapse into dust. Judge Caldwell allowed the courtroom a moment to process. Then she banged her gavel, her voice cutting through the chaos. This court will take a 15-minute recess. Bailiff, clear the gallery. We will reconvene shortly. As the courtroom emptied, Ryan remained motionless. His mother tried to reach him, but the bailiff gently stopped her. Patricia Beckett stood at the railing, her hand extended toward her son, tears streaming down her face. "Ryan," she whispered. "Ryan, please, tell me it's not true." Ryan did not look at her. He stared at the table, his breathing shallow and rapid, his entire body shaking. When the court reconvened, Judge Caldwell looked directly at Ryan. Her expression was no longer neutral. It was one of deep, profound disappointment and anger. She had seen the video. She had heard his voice. She had witnessed a 12-year-old boy calmly preparing to murder 4 of his classmates. "Mr. Beckett," she said, her voice steady but filled with weight. "You will stand." Ryan stood slowly, his legs unsteady. Holloway rose beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder to steady him. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. "I have presided over juvenile cases for 23 years. I have seen children from broken homes, children who have suffered abuse, children who have made terrible mistakes in moments of fear or confusion. I have always believed in rehabilitation, in second chances, in the capacity for growth and change. But what I have seen today challenges every belief I hold about the nature of childhood and innocence." She paused, letting her words settle over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. "The video we just witnessed is not the action of a child caught in a moment of panic. It is not the result of poor judgment or impulsive anger. It is evidence of planning, of intent, of cold and calculated malice. You knew what you were doing, Ryan Beckett. You knew the names of your victims. You spoke their names aloud before you pulled the trigger. You positioned yourself with care. You aimed with precision. And you executed 4 children whose only crime was being young and thoughtless in the way that all children can be." Ryan's face crumpled. Tears began to stream down his cheeks. But they were no longer the performative tears of a boy playing a role. These were the tears of someone who had been caught. Someone who realized that the game was over and the consequences were real. Judge Caldwell continued, her voice growing harder. "Throughout these proceedings, you have performed for this court. You have played the role of a frightened, confused child. You have manipulated your mother's love for you. You have sought sympathy from the gallery and the media. You have lied, repeatedly and without remorse, about your involvement in these murders. You created a fiction about an unknown older teenager, a convenient phantom who could take the blame while you maintained your innocence. But the evidence does not lie, Ryan. The science does not lie. And that video, your own words and actions captured in undeniable clarity, does not lie." She leaned back, her expression one of controlled fury. "You took 4 lives. 4 children who had families, friends, dreams, and futures. Michael Torres wanted to be a veterinarian. Aisha Patel was learning to play the violin. Darnell White was the fastest runner in your grade. Emma Klein wrote poetry and dreamed of publishing a book. They were 12 and 13 years old. They were children, just like you. And you erased them. You erased their futures, their potential, their very existence, because you were angry, because you felt slighted, because you wanted to be seen." Ryan's shoulders shook. He tried to speak, but the words came out as a strangled gasp. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Judge Caldwell's expression did not soften. "You are sorry that you were caught. You are sorry that the performance failed. But I do not believe, not for one moment, that you feel genuine remorse for what you have done." If you did, you would not have spent these weeks lying to this court, to your attorney, and to your mother. You would not have constructed an elaborate fiction to escape responsibility. You would have told the truth. She shuffled the papers in front of her, then looked up again. The law recognizes that you are a minor. The law provides certain protections for individuals under the age of 18. But the law also recognizes that some acts are so heinous, so beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior, that age alone cannot excuse them. You will be held accountable for your actions, Ryan Beckett. This court finds you guilty of 4 counts of premeditated murder. The question now is what justice looks like for someone your age who has committed such a crime. She paused, allowing the weight of the moment to fully settle. Before I impose a sentence, this court will hear victim impact statements. The families of Michael Torres, Aisha Patel, Darnell White, and Emma Klein have the right to address this court and to tell you directly what you have taken from them. You will listen. You will not interrupt. You will face the consequences of your actions not just through the law, but through the words of those you have harmed. The bailiff called the first speaker. Maria Torres, Michael's mother, walked slowly to the podium. She was a small woman, her face aged by grief, her hands clutching a photograph of her son. She looked at Ryan for a long moment before she spoke. My son was 12 years old, she began, her voice breaking on every word. He loved soccer. He loved science fiction movies. He loved making people laugh. Every morning he would wake up singing. He had a terrible voice, but he didn't care. He sang anyway. That's the kind of kid he was. Happy. Full of life. She held up the photograph. This is Michael at his last birthday party. He's smiling because he just opened a present he'd been wanting for months. A telescope. He wanted to look at the stars. He told me he wanted to be an astronaut someday, or maybe a scientist who studies planets. He had so many dreams. Her voice rose, shaking with emotion. You took all of that away. You took his dreams, his future, his voice. You took my son's life because you were angry about some childish teasing. Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand that I will never hear his voice again? That I will never watch him grow up, never see him graduate, never meet his children? You stole all of that from me. From him. For what? Because he called you a name? Because he didn't include you in a game? She was sobbing now, her words barely coherent. He was a child. He was my baby. And you murdered him. You looked at him through that rifle sight and you pulled the trigger. How could you? How could anyone do that? She could not continue. Her husband came forward and led her gently back to her seat. The courtroom was filled with the sound of weeping. The next speaker was Aisha's father, Rajesh Patel. He was a quiet man, a software engineer who had moved his family to Alder Ridge for the good schools and the safe community. He stood at the podium with his hands folded, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. Aisha was our only daughter, he said. She was brilliant. She taught herself to code when she was 9. She played the violin, not because we forced her, but because she loved the sound. She used to practice in the evenings, and my wife and I would sit in the living room and listen. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. He looked at Ryan. You silenced that sound. You ended her life before it had truly begun. She will never go to college. She will never marry. She will never have children of her own. You erased her future in a single moment. And for what? Because she laughed at you once? Because she didn't want to sit with you at lunch? That is the reason my daughter is dead? His voice hardened. You are a coward. You hid behind a rifle and attacked children who had no way to defend themselves. You are not a victim. You are a murderer. And I hope you spend every day of your life remembering what you did. I hope their faces haunt you. I hope you never know peace." He returned to his seat, his shoulders rigid, his grief transmuted into cold, unyielding anger. Darnell's grandmother spoke next. She was 71, a retired teacher who had raised Darnell after his parents died in a car accident when he was 6. She spoke slowly, her voice filled with a weariness that seemed to age her even further. "Darnell was a gift to me," she said. "After I lost my daughter and son-in-law, I thought I had nothing left. Then Darnell came to live with me, and he gave me a reason to keep going. He was so fast, so full of energy. He ran everywhere he went. He couldn't walk from the car to the house. He had to run. He said it felt like flying." She smiled sadly. "He wanted to run track in high school. He had Olympic dreams, you know. He used to say, 'Grandma, one day you're going to watch me on TV, running for a gold medal.' I believed him. I believed he could do anything." Her smile faded. "Now I go to a cemetery every week and put flowers on his grave. That's all I have left, a grave. And you put him there. You, a child who decided that his anger was more important than 4 lives. I pray for you, Ryan Beckett. I pray that God has mercy on your soul. Because I cannot." The final speaker was Emma's older brother, Tyler Klein. He was 16, a high school junior who had walked his sister to school every morning. He stood at the podium with tears streaming down his face, his voice shaking but determined. "Emma was my best friend," he said. "She was annoying sometimes, the way little sisters are. She used to steal my hoodies and leave her books all over my room. But I loved her more than anything. She was the kindest person I knew. She wrote poetry about clouds and stars and feelings she couldn't explain. She gave me a poem on my last birthday. It was about how even when things are hard, there's always something beautiful if you look for it." He wiped his eyes. "I kept that poem. I read it every night. It's the last thing she ever gave me. And I think about what she would have written next, what poems she would have written about love or heartbreak or joy. I think about all the words she'll never write, all the thoughts she'll never share. You took that from her. You took her voice. And I will never forgive you." He looked directly at Ryan. "I hope you rot in prison. I hope you live a long life, long enough to fully understand the weight of what you've done. I hope you never know happiness again." He walked back to his seat, his hands clenched into fists. Judge Caldwell waited until the courtroom had quieted. Then she spoke again, her voice measured and final. "Ryan James Beckett, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment in a juvenile correctional facility. You will remain incarcerated until you reach the age of 21, at which time your case will be reviewed to determine whether you should be transferred to an adult facility. Given the nature and severity of your crimes, this court recommends that you remain incarcerated for the duration of your natural life. You will be eligible for a review hearing when you reach the age of 30, but parole is neither guaranteed nor expected." She paused. "This sentence is not about revenge. It is about accountability. It is about sending a clear message that premeditated murder, regardless of the age of the perpetrator, will not be tolerated. 4 families have been destroyed by your actions. A community has been traumatized. And while no sentence can undo the harm you have caused, this sentence ensures that you will not have the opportunity to harm anyone else." She looked at Ryan one last time. You made a choice, Ryan Beckett. You chose anger over empathy. You chose violence over communication. You chose to end 4 lives because you felt wronged. Those were your choices. Now you must live with the consequences. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck, a sharp, final sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. Ryan collapsed into his chair, his body shaking with sobs. Holloway stood beside him, his expression grim and helpless. Patricia Beckett let out a wail from the gallery, her grief and disbelief pouring out in a sound that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. The bailiff moved forward to take Ryan into custody. Ryan did not resist. He stood slowly, his face streaked with tears, his hands trembling as they were placed in cuffs. He looked back at his mother one last time. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Patricia reached for him, but the bailiff gently held her back. She watched as her son was led away, disappearing through the side door that led to the detention area. The door closed with a heavy thud, and she sank into her seat, her body convulsing with sobs. The victims' families remained seated, their faces a mixture of grief, relief, and exhaustion. Maria Torres clutched her husband, her face buried in his shoulder. Rajesh Patel sat with his head in his hands. Darnell's grandmother stared at the empty defense table, her expression distant. Tyler Klein stood alone, his arms wrapped around himself, tears streaming down his face. Sarah Chen, the reporter who had been covering the case from the beginning, closed her notebook. She had witnessed the entire performance, the rise and fall of Ryan Beckett's carefully constructed innocence. She had seen the mask crack and finally shatter. She had heard the truth spoken in a 12-year-old boy's own voice, captured on video, undeniable and damning. As the courtroom emptied, the weight of what had transpired settled over everyone who had been present. 4 children were dead. A 5th child, their killer, would spend the rest of his life in prison. There were no winners here, no redemption. Only the cold, hard reality of justice served, and lives irrevocably changed. The door to the courtroom closed, the sound echoing in the empty space. Outside, the media crews packed up their equipment. The families made their way to waiting cars, their grief raw and undiminished. Patricia Beckett sat alone on a bench in the hallway, staring at nothing, her world shattered beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, Alder Ridge Middle School held memorials for the 4 victims. Counselors were brought in to help students process their trauma. Security measures were increased. The community struggled to understand how something so horrific could have happened in their quiet town, and how a child they thought they knew could have been capable of such calculated violence. Ryan Beckett was transferred to a high-security juvenile facility 200 miles away. He was placed in isolation for his own safety, as other inmates had made threats. He spent his days in a small cell, his nights haunted by the faces of his victims and the sound of his own voice on that video, confessing his intent before pulling the trigger. The video itself became a subject of intense legal and ethical debate. Should such evidence be made public? Did the public have a right to see the proof of a child's guilt? Or did the privacy protections afforded to juveniles extend even to evidence of their crimes? In the end, the video remained sealed, accessible only to law enforcement, legal professionals, and the victims' families. The world would know it existed, would know what it contained, but would never see it. That small mercy was granted, not for Ryan's sake, but for the sake of the victims and their families, who did not want their children's final moments exploited for public consumption. Judge Margaret Caldwell retired 6 months after the trial. In her final interview, she spoke about the case that had defined the end of her career. "I have always believed in the potential for redemption. she said. "I have always believed that children, even those who commit terrible acts, deserve a chance to grow and change. But Ryan Beckett showed me that there are limits to that belief. Some actions are so calculated, so devoid of empathy, that they reveal a fundamental brokenness that may never be repaired. I do not know if Ryan Beckett can ever truly understand the magnitude of what he did. I do not know if he is capable of genuine remorse. But I know that 4 children are dead, and that is a truth that will never change." The families of the victims continued their lives as best they could, forever marked by the loss. They created scholarships in their children's names. They advocated for stronger safety measures in schools. They spoke at conferences and forums about the impact of violence on communities. They carried their grief with them every day, a weight that never lightened, but became, over time, something they learned to carry. Ryan Beckett became a case study in juvenile psychology and criminal justice. Experts debated whether he was a sociopath, a narcissist, or simply a deeply troubled child who had made an irreversible choice. They analyzed his behavior, his background, his motives. They wrote papers and gave lectures. But no amount of analysis could change the fundamental fact. 4 children were dead, and Ryan Beckett had killed them. Years later, when Ryan reached the age of 21, a review hearing was held to determine his placement. He testified via video link, his face older, but still recognizable. He spoke about his remorse, his understanding of what he had done, his desire to somehow atone. The families attended the hearing. They listened to his words. They did not believe him. The review board determined that Ryan Beckett should remain in custody, transferred to an adult facility for the remainder of his sentence. The recommendation that he serve life without the possibility of parole stood. Ryan Beckett would never be free. He would grow old in prison, a man who had committed an unforgivable act as a child, and would pay for it for the rest of his life. The boy who had performed innocence, who had sought attention and recognition through violence, who had believed he could outsmart the system and escape consequences, learned the hardest truth of all. Some actions cannot be undone. Some sins cannot be forgiven. And some performances end not with applause, but with a lifetime of silence behind bars. The courtroom where his fate was sealed remained in use, hearing hundreds of other cases in the years that followed. But those who had been present during the trial of Ryan Beckett never forgot. They never forgot the video that revealed the truth. They never forgot the judge's condemnation. They never forgot the sound of a mother's grief or the words of families destroyed. And they never forgot the lesson that age is no excuse for evil, that intent matters more than years, and that justice, when it comes, is both necessary and heartbreaking in equal measure.